Well, let me add my word of welcome also. Thank you for coming. Some of you have come a long way to be with us tonight and appreciate so much the effort you've gone to do that. Let me give a few introductory remarks before we get into the topic for tonight. First, I want you to know I'm a science educator. I've never been a researcher, never done the technical science personally, but I've been an educator for a long, long time. That's what I feel is my strength. I've studied, of course, this topic since college days. It's a passion of my life. And so I am a person who has tried to train myself to explain to people complex subjects in a simple enough way to have them make sense. So that's where I'm coming from, and I want you to know that up front. Secondly, this is a series. Tonight is lesson 1. This is really an introductory lesson, and we're not going to get into the meat of the subject until tomorrow. So if you're not able to be here for the rest of these, you're getting the introduction tonight. I hope you can come back, and if you can't, I hope you can get copies of these lectures so you can see all of it together, because it is a series. It could easily be 15 lessons, so that's why I talk fast. And so I expect your class, and I'm going to treat this like a class. And so I may be asking you questions from time to time, and I don't allow sleeping in my class. If I see my audience getting sleepy, we will all stand up and take a little break. Okay? And I'm watching you. I've done this a long time. I can see you. You can't hide. And when we get to a point that I think is particularly important, because I know very well you're not going to remember everything I say, I'm going to try to emphasize some key things throughout in each of these lessons, and then hopefully you'll be interested enough to pursue it further. Third thing I want to say to you is we're leaving behind a bibliography. I think I've already sent that to you, William, and he will have that available. It has all the books that I'm referring to during this series, plus a host of others. And I put stars by the ones that are best. So it will give you another resource to go and study this topic. You are privileged, ladies and gentlemen, to live in this time frame. When I was at Harvard University in the 1960s, I spent every spare minute in Widener Library trying to research this topic. And I can tell you I found nothing from the creationist standpoint worth reading. And they hardly had anything in the first place. In our time, however, in the last 50 years, and particularly the last 30 years, there have been more good material written by creationist writers who are strong and credentialed scientists than all the history of mankind before that. So you really are privileged, and there's lots of wonderful material for your own research if you wish to follow this further. Okay. Now, as I said, this is an introductory lesson because I want to lay the groundwork for the subject. You may or may not be aware that lots of folks in our time, particularly in the scientific community, believe if you introduce the subject of origins from the standpoint of proposing an intelligent designer, God, that you've just stepped out of science. In other words, you're not allowed to do that in science. So one of the things I'd like to discuss with you in this lecture is some of the foundation principles which I'm convinced allow us to discuss the subject of intelligent design from a scientific standpoint. Don't believe that's unscientific at all. I'll try to show you that. All right. Now, I hope during the course of this lecture, if you have questions in your mind, that you'll jot them down if you need to, or just remember them. And when we get finished with this lecture, we'll have some time to do some question and answers. All right. Here was a Time Life or a Time magazine article on April the 8th, 1966. The headline was, "Is God Dead?" And there was a great deal of discussion about that in the 1960s. That's close to my heart because I was in college in those days. And these things that were being said had a great impact upon me. Thomas J.J. Altizer and William Hamilton, both of whom were theologians, wrote a book called Radical Theology and the Death of God. Here's some of the things they said. We must realize that the death of God is an historical event, that God has died in our cosmos, in our history. And the dead God is the God of the historic Christian church, and beyond the church of Christendom at large. These two men are preachers, and they were claiming that in fact God has died in our time. Incredible, isn't that? And that the God that died is the God of Christendom. I can tell you that a large reason for their taking that position is because of the importance of the evolutionary theory and how it's come to take over the worldview of so many people. People who believe in the evolutionary theory, many of them do not believe there's a necessity for having a God. And so folks who believe God is dead also believe that we created God in the first place. And so now we've killed him. Well, that's a common view since the 1960s. And many folks are convinced that there's no necessity for positing a God at all. Here's another brazen thing said more recently by Richard Dawkins in the New York Times. It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, and I'll interrupt the quote and say to you what he means by evolution is that all living things have come from a common ancestry by natural causes, without the necessity of a designer at all. So he says, if you meet somebody that claims not to believe in that picture of how we got here, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked. But I'd rather not consider that. And if you listen to public media at all, Richard Dawkins is a very outspoken proponent of the evolutionary theory and very strongly against folks like me who believe in creation. In fact, he would say, I am stupid or ignorant. That is not a helpful thing to say in a discussion. And I might say some folks on the creationist side say some pretty unhelpful things too sometimes. So one of the things I try to do in this series is to be as balanced as I can be and be fair in what I'm saying. And if I'm not being, I want you to challenge it. Here's a contrasting statement. This is Dr. Anthony Flew, professor of philosophy, former atheist, and author and debater. He debated a number of creationists through the years and was highly incensed at the creationist doctrine and teaching. He said, at 80 years of age, it now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design. And Dr. Flew, who for most of his life spoke against creation and intelligent design, has become a believer in intelligent design. And he did so in large measure based on the evidence of DNA. And that's a subject we're going to talk about tomorrow. So don't miss it. But I appreciate an 80-year-old man changing his mind about something that's fundamental to us. I hope I will continue thinking clearly until I'm 80. By the way, my dad's 100. And on 2 days after his 100th birthday, he preached a 45-minute sermon. I hope I can do that too. Okay, I'm going to refer to one passage in the Bible. I think you saw in the advertisement materials, this is being sponsored by a local church. So you must understand, we're not trying to hide anything about that. I'm associated with that same church. And they are believers in this book as the Word of God. But the approach in this topic is not to rest upon this book. In fact, we're not going to refer to it at all, except in passing. I'm going to show you one passage in this book that takes the same approach I'm going to take in this series. It's Romans chapter 1 and verse 20. So I want to read that to you. Not because I'm using that as the foundation of our discussion, because this discussion does not need any religious book. We're going to be looking elsewhere. But Romans 1 in this book says, since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Here's the argument. You can see God even though he's invisible. So how do you do that? The argument is you can see evidence of God in things that are made. If you see things that have design, it makes you think there's a designer. That's the argument. And I'll just tell you up front, class, that is the argument I'm going to make in every lecture. It's the argument from design. I believe it's always been the most powerful argument for the existence of God from looking at the natural world. The Bible makes that same argument in Romans 1. And it says you should at least be able to determine there is a being with eternal power and of divine nature, which means it's beyond this system. It's not part of nature. This being has to be beyond nature. And those things you should be able to tell just by examining the natural world. That's the argument out of Scripture. All right, but I use that only to illustrate to you that this book makes the same kind of argument we're going to be making in this series. So, let's get at it this way. I don't like standing behind a lecture. And I hope that'll pick me up all right. I think it will. We'll try. I'll speak loudly. That'll keep you awake anyway. I like to approach this subject from looking at this approach. Do you believe, class, that there's intelligent life somewhere else in the universe besides here on Earth? I guess I won't ask you to raise your hands. A lot of people believe there is a possibility of that, and you know that people are searching for that every day of the week. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, otherwise known as SETI, S-E-T-I, was supported by your tax dollars for 25 years. When I was at Harvard University in 67, 68, my astronomy professor, who was a world-famous radio astronomer, was associated with this movement. He and a group of folks all over the world were using radio telescopes to examine various places in the universe to see if they could find evidence of intelligence. For 25 years, your tax dollars were paying for that. After 25 years, when they had found not the first scintilla of any evidence, they took the tax dollars away. That's probably a good thing. But the effort has not stopped. Fact is, SETI still exists, and they're still looking. They're using private funding now. The program continues to this day with private funding. So here's the question. And it's an excellent question because it gets at the heart of what I want to talk about tonight. What kind of evidence would it take to convince you that there's intelligent life somewhere out there in the universe? And you've never thought about that. I want you to think about it. What kind of evidence would it take to make you a believer? And what I'm going to tell you is the approach to that subject that is taken by the SETI organization, I think, is a perfectly legitimate scientific approach. And I'm going to use that same kind of approach to look for evidence of the existence of God. I think it's a perfectly good approach. So let's get at it. Here's their website. You go out there and look at it for yourself. Search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Just Google that and you'll get on their website. Here's what it says in the first paragraph. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, is an exploratory science that seeks evidence of life in the universe by looking for some signature of its technology. So what are they looking for? They're looking for something out there that would indicate there's technology out there. Because nobody believes that nature can produce technology. That would require intelligence. That's their approach. So what are they looking for? Virtually all radio SETI experiments have looked for what are called narrow band signals. These are radio emissions that are at one spot on the radio dial. I drove up here today from Syracuse. I was listening to 89.9 FM. That's beautiful music on it. You dial your radio to a specific place on the dial, and you can receive messages over the radio through radio signals. What these folks are looking for is something like that in outer space. Narrow band radio signals with information. Their position is, if you could find something like that, that is a mark of a purposely built transmitter. Because natural cosmic noisemakers, such as pulsars and quasars, do not make radio signals that are narrow and that contain information. So if they could find, ladies and gentlemen, a narrowband radio signal from somewhere in space that contained information, in their mind, that would be powerful evidence there's intelligence out there. Because that's the sign of an intelligent designer. Well, I don't know how you feel about that. So let me ask it this way. If we received a signal from outer space and it was verified by 16 different scientists, and that message said, "We're out here, come and find us, help!" I mean, if we seriously received such a signal, wouldn't that be a pretty good indicator that somebody out there that's intelligent? I think so. I don't think that's a bad line of argument. And I'm not opposed to but they're looking for it. It's just fine. And they're using the methods of science, folks. Using radio telescopes. And all the techniques that go with that. And by the way, if they were to find such a signal, they could infer that the cause was intelligent without necessarily being able to identify what that intelligence was. That's a very important point, class. If I tell you that's an important point, you need to remember that one. They can identify signs of intelligence without necessarily knowing what that intelligence is. That's important. There's a limit to what science can tell you in some areas. So where did we come from? We intelligent beings here on the face of the earth. Where did we come from? I don't believe there are any more than two answers to that question. One answer is you came about by natural causes. That is, life in all its forms emerged from simple substances by natural means. That is the standard atheistic evolutionary view of life. No God necessary, no intelligence required. Nature did it. Natural causes. The blind forces of physics, as Richard Dawkins would say, acted upon by natural selection. And by the way, this is another of his books, The Blind Watchmaker. And let me just share you a little piece of the first part of this book. He says in here at the beginning of the book that he has a great respect for some creationists, but they're just wrong. The watchmaker of my title, The Blind Watchmaker, is borrowed from a famous treatise by the 18th century theologian William Paley. You ever heard of William Paley, class? Several of you have. If you had gone to college in the 1800s in England, you would have studied William Paley. And the book you would have studied is this one, Natural Theology, or the Evidences of the Existence and Attributes of the Deity Collected from the Appearances of Nature. It's the most famous book of that time on this topic. So here's what Dawkins says about Paley. He proposed in 1802 the best-known exposition of the argument from design, always the most influential of the arguments for the existence of God. It's a book I greatly admire, for in his own time, its author succeeded in doing what I am struggling to do now. He had a point to make, he passionately believed in it, and he spared no effort to ram it home. He had a proper reference for the complexity of the living world, and he saw that it demands a very special kind of explanation. The only thing he got wrong, admittedly quite a big thing, was the explanation itself. He gave the traditional religious answer to the riddle, but he articulated it more clearly and convincingly than anybody else had before. So Dawkins thinks Paley did a good job. He just got the wrong answer. So I skip down a little bit. Paley's argument is made with passionate sincerity and is informed by the best biological scholarship of his day. But it is wrong, gloriously and utterly wrong. Now let me give you Paley's argument, the fundamental argument. You're walking along in England in the heat, and you trip upon a stone. And you look down at that stone, and you may ask yourself, how did that stone get to be there? And maybe you would say, it might have always been there. It doesn't look like it has any particular shape or value. That stone could have just been there for a long, long time. But if you walk along the same heath and you kick over a stone and there's a watch lying there, it is highly doubtful that you would say, isn't it interesting that that watch has been lying there for a long, long time, and that it wasn't made by anything. It just came about kind of like that rock. Nobody would say that, class. And Paley's argument was that watch is an evidence of a watchmaker. Whereupon he proceeds to explain all about the cogs and the springs and all the things that make a watch work. And then he says, class, in nature there are things much more complex than watches. And surely we could conclude the same kind of reason, that those also must have been made by some kind of a maker. And so it was the argument of the watchmaker. Now what Dawkins says is, he did a wonderful job explaining all that, but he's just dead wrong. And here's what Dawkins said. The analogy between the telescope and the eye, between a watch and a living organism, is false. All appearances to the contrary, the only watchmaker in nature is the blind forces of physics, albeit deployed in a very special way. A true watchmaker has foresight. He designs his cogs and springs and plans their interconnections with a future purpose in his mind's eye. Natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic process which Darwin discovered, and which we now know is the explanation for the existence and apparent purposeful form of all life, has no purpose in mind. It has no mind. It has no mind's eye. It does not plan for the future. It has no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play the role of a watchmaker in nature, it is the blind watchmaker. So let me tell you what Richard Dawkins believes, ladies and gentlemen. He believes that you, sitting here with all your complexity, came about by the blind forces of physics acted upon by natural selection. There was no intelligent designer needed to make you or anything else you see in nature. He is the ultimate reductionist. He believes that you can take the history of how you came about and break it down into small enough steps, each of which is very reasonable to have happened just naturally. And they all add up over time to produce you. That's his position. It takes 300 pages trying to convince you. I'm going to try to convince you the exact opposite. And it's going to be based on the evidence of the scientific world, not the Bible. All right. I don't believe there's more than two possibilities. You either came about by natural causes, which is Dawkins' position, and many others, or you came about by intelligent design. That is, life in all its forms is a result of intelligent shaping of matter. Somewhere in the process, there had to be intelligence or it never would have happened. That's my position. I don't believe there are any other answers, ladies and gentlemen. There are only two. You either came about by natural causes without any intelligent design needed at all, or there was intelligent design required somewhere in the process. If you have another answer to that question, I'd be happy to hear it. I've been doing this for 50 years. I've never had anybody give me another answer. That doesn't mean there isn't one, but I don't know of another answer. So this resolves itself really into a simple question. Which of those is the most reasonable answer to this question? Based on the natural causes that we see. What do I mean by intelligent design? I mean a theory for how we may properly conclude something is designed by an intelligent source. I think you can examine that. That's exactly what CT is doing. They're looking into outer space, looking for things that are natural in the natural world, and they're trying to conclude something intelligent did that. You see what I'm saying? I think that's perfectly good reasoning. The theory of intelligent design is there is lots of evidence in the natural world that points to intelligence behind it. What that intelligence is, let me just show you. Was this designed is one question. Who designed it is a different question. Those are two different questions. And I'm not certain that science can give us a real good answer to that second. But I do believe it can answer with great certainty whether this had to be designed. So what's happened in our modern world is, with folks scared about the second question, that God's going to get his foot in the door, we've thrown out the first question as well. That's not necessary, ladies and gentlemen. And we use design all the time in science. Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Both inferences about the origin of life and its diversity are ultimately positions of faith. Now, if you're here tonight and you're a believer in the evolutionary theory, if you're like the folks I've talked to before, you don't like your position to be called a position of faith. In fact, I guess I've not irritated people any more than by telling them there's a position of faith. Because when folks hear that, they think, blind, I'm just going to accept this, whether I can prove it or not, or whether I can examine it by natural causes or not. Faith is blind. No, it isn't. Faith should be founded on reason, whatever position you take. But folks, when you're dealing with origins in the remote past, when there were no human beings around in the first place, you're taking a position of faith, and here's why. Origins are not amenable to normal, repeatable experimentation or direct observation. Nobody was there. You can't go back there and repeat what happened. You don't know what was going on. Nobody was there to measure it. And secondly, the best we can do is use present circumstances and draw inferences about the remote past. That's why any position on origin is ultimately a position of faith. You're going to believe it based on your interpretation of the evidence. Let's be honest about that. We also need to be honest because this subject is so emotional. I'm going to go ahead and put all of those up there. This is an emotional topic. I'm a chemistry teacher. I never had a parent come storming into my class and say, "What are you doing teaching children things are made of atoms and electrons and protons?" I never had anybody get upset with me over that. But if I teach creation, I had some furious parents. And if you teach evolution, you got some furious parents. Why is that? Folks, this topic gets at the root of who we are. and what we're doing here and why we exist. That's pretty important stuff. Whether we're made of atoms or not, I don't think that makes a whole lot of difference with regard to who we are. This subject does. That's why you get so much overstatement of the case. So we need to approach this subject with honesty. Everybody comes at it with a background. So I like to tell you at the beginning of this series, class, I was raised by parents who believed in God and who believed that book is the Word of God. From the time I was a baby, I was quoting Scripture by the time I was 3. So you just need to understand that's where I come from. And I will tell you that makes me want to believe in God. And I think I've been honest with myself about that. I tend to want to see things that support the position that there is a God. Now, will you be honest with yourself? Because if you're an atheist or an agnostic, you also have a background. I don't know what it is, but you've got one. And you come at this subject with your own set of presuppositions. So be honest about that. And I'll tell you what happens. We tend to see what we expect to see, or what we want to see. And sometimes we ignore pieces of evidence that don't support what we already believe. So let's be honest about that and be careful. Do the best we can. Stand back and try to look at the evidence as rationally as you can. So we're going to look at the evidence of the natural world, and that's it. We're not making appeals to religious books. This evidence can be used to judge the relative merits of these two views. There are only two answers to this. And it's going to be very much like a court case. Here's the evidence. That's the facts of nature. Here's the evolutionary interpretation. Here's the intelligent design interpretation. And you're going to have to be the judge. And the best you can do is answer which is more reasonable. So let me use an example. Most of you remember a famous court case of some years ago when O.J. Simpson was accused of killing somebody. You remember that case? Was he convicted in the criminal case? No, he was not. What do you have to prove in a criminal case? You have to prove the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Did all of you know that he had a civil case on this same matter and he lost? Because in a civil case, what do you have to prove? Anybody know? You have to show that the preponderance of the evidence favors your position, not beyond a reasonable doubt. So in the same case, he lost the civil case. He won the criminal case. I don't know how you feel about that, and frankly, I don't care. It illustrates my point. And I think this is much more like a civil case. It's going to be the preponderance of the evidence that's going to convince you. Not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's never going to be where you don't have to have faith. You listening to me? I don't believe God has made it in such a way that you'll ever reach a position where you don't have to believe it based on the evidence. It's more like a civil case. But I am convinced the preponderance of the evidence is on in favors design. A lot of people disagree with me. By the way, let's go back to this. Give me one piece of evidence from the O.J. Simpson trial. Everybody says a bloody glove. Do you remember anything else from that case? There was also blood spots on the carpet of the vehicle. And in science, you can take blood and test it, can you not? And you can pretty well identify who it came from. The bloody glove was very important because it had blood on it, and it came from somebody who had a part in it. And of course, who did that evidence belong to? It belonged to everybody. The evidence is used by the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney. Same evidence, but did they put different interpretations on it? Yeah, the prosecutor said that's his glove and he's guilty of sin. The defense attorney said, no, it's not his glove. Somebody else's glove. Doesn't even fit him. I'm giving you that illustration because, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence of the natural world belongs to all of us. The question is, which interpretation is the most reasonable? And we're going to look at some lines of evidence in this series. And then we're going to ask the question, which is the more reasonable explanation? The blind forces of physics acted upon by natural selection, or an intelligent design? And you'll answer that way. Okay. I did this series on the campus of the University of Maine many years ago at Orono. We had about 250 people there. 10 of them were creationists. Everybody else were evolutionists. And I loved it. We had the best time because we had lots of interaction, lots of disagreement. And one of the men in that audience was a biology teacher at the University of Maine named Dr. Cornfield. Isn't that a good name for a biology teacher? And we teased each other a lot because my name is Dr. Payne. That's worse than Cornfield. But what I always say to people is, my name is Payne, and the Y takes the hurt out of it. So we teased about our names a lot. But Dr. Cornfield was after me during that whole series. And he said this, now, Dr. Payne, if you bring intelligent design into this discussion, you just stepped out of the field of science. Science doesn't allow intelligent design. It allows only natural causes, not supernatural causes. And I would say to you, he's right about that. Because there's no way for science to investigate supernatural things. So he's right about that piece. But my answer to him was this, Dr. Cornfield, are you going to throw out the baby with the bathwater? Science uses inference to intelligent design all the time. On the contrary, many fields in science require inferences of intelligent design regularly. Here are some examples. Anthropology and archaeology. You go out there digging in the ground and you find something. Maybe you find a rock that's got a certain shape to it. Maybe it's even got a sharp edge. And you ask yourself the question, that rock that I just found, did that come about by natural causes? Wind blowing on it, it falling on stuff, rain, any other natural phenomenon? Is there any natural phenomenon we know that could have made a rock have a sharp edge to it like that? That's a very common question. And I can tell you, anthropologists are always looking for evidence that something intelligent made that. They call it a tool. And if they find a rock they think is a tool, and there's some bones close to it, they call the bones a man. Right? Because only men we know of make tools like that. Is that an inference to design? Yes, it is. It's done all the time. So let's look at some examples. Class, I want you to look at that cloud. And if you've seen this before, you don't get the flag. Are you a cloud watcher? You can see all kinds of neat things in clouds. Do you see anything in that cloud? What do you see? A puppy dog. Man, I don't see that. I see Santa Claus. Let me see if I can help you. I say that's an eye right there. Here's another eye. Here's a little nose. There's a little round mouth, and here's his white beard. You see that Santa Claus right there? Looks like it to me. Anybody see anything else? You see a puppy dog. Let me back this up here. Now, are you talking about this right here? What does that look like, everybody? That looks like a bunny rabbit, doesn't it? Here's his head, there's his ears, here's his legs, here's his little tail. That's a bunny rabbit. Now, here's my question, class. If you're looking at this and you ask yourself, how did that come to pass? Would you have to say God did that? Or could you say nature did that? See, that's the question. Is that a natural phenomenon? Or did that have to be specifically designed? There are lots of things that happen in nature that don't have to be specifically designed. Nature can do those things. Yeah, it could be man-made pollution. That's true. We're not talking about that. I would say to you, the formation of clouds by water vapor up in the air that's acted upon by wind blowing it around from place to place can do all kinds of things like this. You don't need to propose God for this or intelligent design. That's a natural phenomenon. And I think most people would agree with that because you can observe things like this all the time and watch them happen. Just naturally. Okay, but what if you saw this in the clouds? Which, by the way, Marilyn and I were walking into Disney World recently, and we looked up in the sky, and it said, Jesus saves! It literally said that in the clouds. And what do you think we started doing? Exactly right. We got our binoculars out and started looking for a sky rider. And we found one. He was up there making that in the sky. Because nobody believes that would form by water vapor acted on by wind or anything else up in the atmosphere. That has information in it, ladies and gentlemen. It's communicating a message. It contains information. And I will tell you, we don't know anything in nature that produces something like that without the imposition of intelligence. That's the argument I'm making. How about this one? That is a natural phenomenon. It exists somewhere on Earth. Who knows where that one is? That one's in England. Has anybody ever seen it yourself? Have you been there? Okay. Isn't that a famous place? It's called Stonehenge. And it exists on Earth. My question to you is, was that done by intelligent design, or is that a natural phenomenon? Those rocks weigh tons. And there's some of them standing up with cross pieces. Do you think a hurricane blew through there and set that up like that? Or do you think there's any other natural phenomenon that could produce something like this? And by the way, the studies on this have indicated that they may be in a shape like that because when the sun hits those at certain times of the day, it appears that maybe there's some religious significance to this phenomenon. I will tell you what everybody has concluded about Stonehenge. That was an intelligently designed phenomenon. Nobody believes nature did that by itself. Why? Because of the characteristics. It has the characteristics of design. How about this one? This is getting down to anthropology. I took this out of a science magazine. These two pieces of rock were found over in Africa by anthropologists. And the question they were trying to answer is, were those done by natural causes? Did they get in that shape by natural causes? Well, you can run all kinds of experiments, ladies and gentlemen, on that. Make careful observations of its features. You see, the edges of that rock are very sharp. It appears they were chipped off. What it looks like. You know there are books written about this? Some of that thing? About nothing but whether a chipped rock was done by intelligence or it happened naturally. You talk about boring. If you ever have trouble going to sleep, you get one of those books. I mean, it's page after page after page describing the striations and how that might have taken place. And I had some people tell me after one of these lectures, I'm offended. I do that for a living, and it's not boring. So I apologize to any anthropologists out here. But the fact is, it is boring. But I will tell you what they can do. After careful analysis of this entire phenomenon, running all kinds of experiments on it, they can come to about a 99% certain conclusion. That rock and that one got in that shape because somebody with intelligence acted on it. Nature doesn't do this. So the conclusion in this case was that those were scrapers done by somebody like that. See, they found bones over there in Africa. They called the guy Homo habilis, handyman. And by the way, they didn't have anywhere near all of that skeleton, and a whole lot of that's figments of your imagination. But they did find these rocks nearby, and of course all the headlines said, this is the latest and greatest find in the history of human evolution. This is the most ancient tool-making man. Why? Because they concluded these things were tools not made by nature, but made by something intelligent. Do you see the reasoning I'm talking about here, clients? They're taking a natural phenomenon, examining it by the methods of science, and concluding it took intelligence to do that. That's what I'm asking us to do. And there's nothing wrong with it. And I said to Dr. Cornfield last night, Dr. Cornfield, is that good science or not? I believe it is. And they concluded intelligent design. You know what his answer was? An archaeologist or an anthropologist who finds this is talking about human intelligence, and that's still part of nature. Because human beings are part of nature. So it's still nature doing it. Can you believe that, class? Here's what I said to Dr. Cornfield, and I'll say it to you. You have just turned the whole subject up on its head. Because the whole discussion here is centered around, does it require intelligence to do something? Not what kind of intelligence it is. Did this require intelligence? And you are presuming that human intelligence is just part of nature. My question to you is, where did the first human intelligence come from that became part of nature? That's the whole question. Don't confuse your students by tricky reflections like that. What I'm saying is, we reason toward intelligence in science all the time. You're trying to defuse that argument by saying it's only human intelligence, and that's still part of nature. You've just missed the whole argument. And so here was my second answer. What about this one? In 1967, in my astronomy class at Harvard, my teacher came in one morning and he put this on the board. He said, class, last night on the radio telescopes that are around the world, we were centering them on a particular spot in space, and he told us exactly where in space. And filtering out the noise of space, we picked up this signal. And he said, it's possible, class, that for the first time in the history of mankind, we've received some kind of signal from an intelligent source in outer space. And he proceeded to tell us all about that phenomenon. It's a radio wave that has certain characteristics. And they really thought, maybe for the first time. I'm going to tell you the end of the story. They've found so many of these now, nobody believes that that's from an intelligent source. They believe it's a pulsating star that makes those signals. And that can happen naturally. See, those signals are too regular. They don't contain information. If that thing had said, Jesus saves, that'd be a different matter. But these signals are too regular. But here was my question to Dr. Cornfield. Dr. Cornfield, my Harvard professor, looked at that signal and concluded it might have come from an intelligent source. Is that science? And by the way, if it did come from an intelligent source, was that human out there? Was the source of that intelligence human? And therefore just part of nature? The fact is, Dr. Cornfield, you don't know anything about that intelligence except those bleeps on a radio telescope. But can a scientist conclude intelligent design without necessarily knowing who the intelligence is? Yes, he can. Is it a part of nature or isn't it? That's an open question. Well, I brought along another little book here. This was required reading in my astronomy class in 1967. Intelligent Life in the Universe by Carl Sagan and I.S. Schlossman. And I want to tell you, it's full of reasons to believe there's intelligence out there. You see, Carl Sagan believed even in our Milky Way galaxy there had to be millions of other civilizations. The chances of it having evolved lots of other places is so great, there had to be millions of them. You need to come back tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to talk about the rare earth. And I'm going to explain to you why many scientists, like Carl Sagan, have completely changed their mind about that. And they're now saying the earth may be so rare there may be no other place in the entire universe like it. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But in the 1960s, listen, everybody was trumpeting what Carl Sagan said. There are lots of places out there in outer space, and if you watch your news, they're looking for signs of planets right now. Do you know that? And they found a number of places where they think they've located planets, which might have been habitable. The search goes on. Here's what I want to tell you. In this book are numerous lines of reasoning that would lead you to conclude there's intelligence here. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. So, since Carl Sagan and his patriots never found anything in outer space they could really hang on to, he wrote a book called Contact, in which they did find something. Ladies and gentlemen, that is fiction! It's fiction. But it's a good book. How many have read the book? That's what going to be my next question. How many have seen the movie? Well, see, that's the spirit of our age. May I preach to you a little bit? We live in an age when everything's been movified, if that's the word. The book's better. But here's what they found. You see all those radio telescopes on this advertisement? It's exactly what I was talking about. We're looking all over, and the SETI's still doing this. They have radio telescopes all over the world looking. They said they found something. And there's what they found. So let me blow that up for you. That, ladies and gentlemen, convinced them that there was intelligent design. Did you see why? Let me explain it to you. You'll see why. See these ones here? Those are bleeps on the radio telescope. And the zeros are pauses. Okay? So watch with me. And when you get the pattern, raise your hand. Have you seen this before? Then you can't play. If you've seen it before, you're not allowed to play. How many beeps? 2 beeps and a pause. 3 beeps and a pause. 5 bleeps and a pause. 7 bleeps and a pause. 11 bleeps and a pause. Please don't make me just go on and on. What do you think it is? Yeah, those are the prime numbers. In fact, you got the next one. What is the next one? You remember? After 11? 13. Next one, anybody know? Hard to count all of them. 17. Next one. What's the next prime number after 17? 19. What's a prime number? Anybody want to tell me what a prime number is? Yes, sir. It's a number that can only be divided by itself and 1. Nothing else. You can't divide 19 by anything except 19 and 1. That makes it a prime number. So what you have up here, ladies and gentlemen, in this supposed signal from outer space is the first 25 prime numbers in a row. Did you know, class, that 101 is a prime number? 101 is only divisible by 101 and 1. Nothing else. It's the 25th prime. In fact, if you went down here and you started with that 0 right there and counted all those ones, there's exactly 101 of them. So, you had a sequence of numbers leaked out on a radio telescope that represents the first 25 prime numbers in a row. Now, what would you conclude? Would you say, isn't it interesting how that star leaked out those 25 prime numbers in a row? Isn't that fascinating? What nature did? Nobody would say that. Nobody. And by the way, in the book they didn't say that either. Everybody that examined this said that has to come from intelligence. Now, for the next few minutes, I'm going to do something mathematical. I'm a math teacher. I love math. It's the queen of the sciences. And if you can describe a physical phenomenon mathematically, you've described it in the most precise and beautiful way that can possibly be described. In fact, I think you're thinking God's thoughts actually. Dr. William Dembski, in this little book called The Design Inference, argues that you can determine something is designed by examining it mathematically. I want to show you briefly what he spends a book describing. And I would urge you to read the book. There's some heavy math in it, but it's good reading. Here's what he says. For any event or object, there are only 3 possibilities. It either had to occur, that is, it was inevitable. The forces of nature were going to make it happen. Or it was an accident, that it was purely by chance. You know, don't you, things happen by chance? They do. Random events. Or it was designed. Dr. Dembski argues there's no other answer. You look at an event or a phenomenon, it either was inevitable, or it was random, or it happened by design. And he believes you can answer the question with great certainty by examining it mathematically. So, we're going to examine this phenomenon I just showed you that same way. Here he says is the funnel of questions you need to ask. First question, is this event or this thing, remember this set of radio signals that had those 25 prime numbers in it? That's what we're thinking about. Is this thing contingent? That is, if the answer to that is no, then it was inevitable. If it's contingent, the answer is yes. That means many other things could have happened instead of that. Right? Okay, so let's think about this. Contingency, you must first of all think it's compatible with the laws of nature, and the regularities or laws permit any number of alternatives. Could be lots of alternatives. So how about this, ladies and gentlemen? Is that the only way you could bleep out something? So there got to be millions of other ways those bleeps could be, right? That's just one way. Could have been millions of different ways. This sequence is not the inevitable result of natural laws. It's contingent. Could have happened in a lot of ways. Okay, so our first question's answer is yes. That's definitely contingent. It didn't have to happen. Second question. Is it complex? If it isn't, then it could have happened by chance. If it is too complex, the answer is yes, and you drop down to the next question. So here's my comment about that. Suppose the signal we received was 2 space 3 space 5, and that's all. 22 bits, first 3 prime numbers. It's contingent. But could it have happened by chance? I think you could throw the dice enough time to make that happen. While this signal is contingent, it's too simple. It could reasonably have happened by chance. But what about this one? 1,126 bits that contains the first 25 prime numbers. I mean, folks, that stretches your memory. Now, the chapter in this book about that point is long, because it discusses probability. It's great one. But Dembski argues you can study the probability of events and come up with a good, reasonable conclusion. And he would argue that is sufficiently complex that it's unreasonable to attribute it to chance. So we're going to say the answer to that second question is yes, that's way too complex to be a chance event. But there's a third question. And I want you to get this one, class. Will you listen to me? To me, this is the key to Dembski's method. Not only does it have to be complex, but it needs to contain specified information. Specified. Things that can be specified ahead of time. Like in this book, Sagan and his compatriot listed about 20 different ways that they said, if you find this, it took intelligence. Ahead of time. So is this phenomenon specified? Let's look at it again. Specified means there's a pattern in it that is independent of the event. In other words, side information can construct the pattern. What's the pattern in this event? It's the first 25 what, class? Prime numbers. So, all right, class, without looking at it, you're going to help me construct the first 25 prime numbers. Is 2 a prime number, class? Say it out loud. Yes, because it's only divisible by 2 and 1. Is 3 a prime number? Yes, because it's only divisible by 3 and 1. Is 4 a prime number? No, because it's divisible by 4, 2, and 1, right? Not a prime number. How about 5? Yes. How about 6? No, because it's divisible by 6, 3, 2, and 1. How about 7? Prime number. How about 8? No, because it's divisible by 8, 4, 2, and 1. Not prime. How about 9? No, it's divisible by 9, and what else? 3, and 1. Don't you love the math drill? Class, you could generate the first 25 prime numbers without ever looking at that. Because it's a pattern. It has specified information. Are you seeing what I'm telling you? Here's what Dembski said. If the phenomenon has specified information in it, if the answer to that third question is yes, which it is in this case, then you have something to decide. And you've analyzed that matter. I love that. So that's pure science. Now, are there folks that disagree with Dembski? Absolutely. He's been crucified for his position. But he's right. So, if you can come down this funnel and ask these 3 questions and answer them all yes, Dembski would say to you, that's 99.9% certain that was designed by an intelligent being. In the book Contact, those folks knew good and well that was contingent, it was complex, and it was specified in advance. That's one of the things that Sagan has in his book. You receive a signal with the first 25 prime numbers. So everybody concluded that was an intelligent source, and we heard from somebody, and they started trying to make contact. And listen to me, ladies and gentlemen. If we received that signal, and we really could verify it, every headline in every newspaper on earth would say that was an intelligent source. And there'd be no fussing about it. Absolutely. We got a lot better than that right here under our noses. Why can't we use the same kind of reason? So which is more reasonable in that case? Natural causes? Isn't it wonderful what that star bleeds out of? Or intelligent design? Which is more reasonable in that case? There's no question looking at it. What if we received a message from space with a language in it that we could decode and read? That's tomorrow morning's lecture. Don't you miss it. And so I conclude this lesson tonight by saying the issue is not scientific fact versus religious faith. If you read the discussions about this subject, that's the way to portray it. We're doing science. You're doing religion. Don't let them do that. Dr. Cornfield tried to do that. That's not what the issue is. The issue is which position of faith is more reasonable based on the interpretation of the evidence. Because they're both positions of faith. One is not science and one religion. They're both positions of faith, however you want to describe that. And you're going to believe it. And Dr. Cornfield got so hot at me about that. And you know what's interesting? There was a 2-day series. I did 2 lectures Thursday night, 2 lectures Friday night. On Friday night, in the last lecture, the Q&A, Dr. Cornfield got up and said, "Now, Dr. Payne, I believe." He caught himself. And the whole place erupted. I said, "You're right, Dr. Cornfield. You do believe with all your heart. You're wrong, but you believe." And I appreciate you saying that. But that is the truth. You believe it. And you believe the evidence supports your position. I believe the exact opposite. And I think everybody in this room sees that I've used the same scientific evidence you use and drew a different conclusion. The issue is not the evidence obtained from science. Cornfield said that night, "Dr. Payne, why don't you creationists ever bring your own evidence? All you ever do is criticize our evidence." What's the answer to that? The evidence belongs to all of us. It's not your evidence and my evidence. It is the evidence. The issue is not the evidence. It's which interpretation of the evidence is more reasonable. We look at the same evidence. But people try to draw the lines there and make the argument vague. And I think I could win an argument if there's only 2 answers and one of them is excluded. You think you could win a debate where the only other answer is excluded from the discussion? That's what's happened in our public schools. Intelligent design is not allowed because it's considered religion. We had a judge in Ohio proclaim that not long ago. Evolution is science. Intelligent design is religion, so we can't allow that in the science classroom. Now, folks, I will tell you, I don't want some folks to believe in intelligent design teaching in a science classroom, but they'll make the biggest mess of it they ever saw. I'm not trying to get political about it. I am trying to say to you, you listen to my approach and you tell me whether this is appropriate for a science classroom. And by the way, if I were teaching your biology class, I wouldn't get shouty and creepy like that. We just talk about the evidence. So, summary. We all approach a subject of origins with personal biases. Admit that up front. It's an emotional subject because it has implications far beyond what science can answer. Like wiring the view. Science permits any cause, natural or intelligent, if it is supported by uniform sensory experience. It's not unscientific to say that has an intelligent cause. We do it all the time. The methods of science and the evidence of the natural world can be used to judge the relative merits of the 2 views, natural causes or intelligent design. We do it all the time. The design inference can be analyzed mathematically. Tried to show you that. And finally, any position on origins is a position at the base of it. Has to be. But it's not blind. Faith based on interpreting the evidence in the most reasonable way. Okay, class. That's tonight's lecture.